rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, hello and welcome to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. I want to share with you one word. That word is justice. This is the real reason that DeSantis is lagging in the polls behind Trump. In my opinion, it doesn't have much to do with DeSantis himself. It doesn't have much to do with his campaign, although you have media outlets trying to frame it as such. That isn't the reason. The word justice is the reason. When people look back at 2020 and they consider all of the things that happened with this irregular, if you will, election in 2020, Ron DeSantis is going to have a hard problem getting past that because people aren't looking towards 2024 yet. The people, the Trumpsters, are still looking at 2020 and they want justice. And no matter how good your candidacy is, Ron DeSantis may not be able to deliver that for them. This, that, and more on this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please stay tuned for some quick program messaging and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by MyPillow.com. Mike Lindell is the creator of MyPillow, and he's the CEO of MyPillow. And right now, he has an exclusive offer for my listeners. Buy one, get one free of the new MyPillow 2.0. It has that same patented adjustable feel as the original MyPillow that you all loved, but now he's got this temperature regulating thread that makes it even softer, smoother, and cooler to the touch, so you get an even better night's rest. So that's right, buy one, get one free. All you have to do is go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square at the top of the page, and enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L. Or give them a call, 800-858-0263. On top of getting a good night's rest, here's what you're supporting, all right? In all honesty, you're supporting American jobs and you're supporting American manufacturing. And we need more of that. We need more American entrepreneurs in the United States of America that aren't these big woke corporations and that are providing middle-class jobs to American citizens. That's exactly what Mike Lindell is doing, and you can be a part of that as well as getting a good night's rest. So please go to mypillow.com. Again, click on that radio listener square at the top of the page and enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L. All right, guys, I want to get into this particular message here. First, let me share with you some of the news of the day. Obviously, the big story is still that you had Christopher Wray, the FBI director, on the Hill, and I'm looking at the wrong day's headlines. Yeah. Christopher Wray. I'm pulling up yesterday's headline. So Christopher Wray that was on the Hill, and there was a lot of questions thrown his way, a lot of takeaways from that. We're not going to get into that. We will delve into that in another podcast. But Jim Jordan laid into him. He questioned the FBI director about targeting Americans. And there were so many great, I think, exchanges, but not just with Jim Jordan, but with Matthew Gates, Representative Matt Gaetz. So we'll have more of that in a later podcast. We'll deal with that separately, but that is in the headlines. And it turns out Christopher Wray seems to not know anything about his own FBI, or at least he's not able to answer much of anything. If I could give you a couple of takeaways just from it, based upon another column, surveillance programs within the FBI, those are in jeopardy. They should no longer be of use. Obviously, they have abused those surveillance or spy powers the FBI has when it comes to Russiagate. We've seen somewhat of a Russiagate repeat with one of the people that was involved in Russiagate being involved in yet another FBI scandal of sorts. Correcting the record on abortion violence is something that we saw where Wray acknowledged that violence against anti-abortion facilities and crisis pregnancy centers had risen dramatically since Roe v. Wade. Social media censorship was in the spotlight. The FBI were a part of that. The targeting of Catholics, specific targeting of Catholics. No word on the Biden investigation, the Hunter Biden laptop, all that stuff is a mystery. January 6th plants that were there. We'll talk more about that in another podcast. But there's still there's still a lot to be answered for. Still a lot to be answered for, and not a lot of answers from FBI Director Christopher Wray. I'm of the opinion that that organization needs to be brought down to size. It really does. I think they need to do away with it. I'm not sure that there is any saving that organization, and I take that back. I don't think they can save it. I don't think we live in a moral society nowadays where you can save that particular organization. I think it needs to be chopped down, consolidated, let people be re-interviewed, let the good guys, if there are good guys remaining, let them go through a stringent interview process with another agency and weed all of the bad actors out. I think that's what needs to happen. More in the news, people are still attacking the film by Jim Caviezel. Obviously, they are. It's amazing to me how the left are somehow not concerned about human trafficking, perhaps because some of their own, including that CNN producer. You guys remember that guy? The guy that worked for Chris Cuomo, ended up being a sex trafficker of sorts, having sex with little children, with scandalous parents who also participated in it. He got sentenced to prison. So a lot going there. California shuts down a bipartisan bill to increase penalty for child traffickers. So a lot of perverts in the legislature that's in California. You're going to see Biden and Zelensky meet at the NATO summit. Media smears Lori Smith after Supreme Court case. Who is Lori Smith? The permanent political campaign against the Supreme Court has expanded to target successful litigants. Last month, the justices ruled in favor of our client, Lori Smith. She's the 303 creative, the woman, the Christian website designer who was being prosecuted by the radical leftists in the LGBT community. And they wanted to silence her and destroy her. Well, they still don't like her, and they seem to be going after her. But that's what they are. That's what they are. The left are a bunch of bullies. I said that's what they are, as if I had mentioned something. I'm sorry, because I'm looking at some of the headlines at Real Clear Politics as we go, and also from the tip sheet. But you still have Ilhan Omar says she won't attend the address to Congress next week by the Israeli president. She's an anti-Semite, so you should expect nothing less from her. The House majority is in play next year. There's a lot. DeSantis is wooing Iowa voters. And also you have this thing happening tomorrow with Tucker Carlson. The Blaze is putting it on. But to host GOP presidential primary forum, Tucker Carlson is going to host it. So these guys aren't going to get a pass. I think it's going to be Governor Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Senator Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, and former Vice President Mike Pence. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't feel a need to be there. He's not going to be there. But I think that's going to be interesting, because I don't think Tucker Carlson is, especially now that he's loose, like he should get a show, Tucker Carlson Loosed, or something like that. So I think these guys are going to have to answer some tough questions, and I think that's a good thing. Let me get to the topic at hand. Everyone is talking about how DeSantis is lagging in the polls. There's a media narrative, right, that DeSantis is not only lagging in the poll, but DeSantis has stalled in the polls, right? You hear that all the time. There was a failure to launch. His campaign has stalled. Will he remain number two? You hear this over and over and over again. And I think the media, in part, the left-wing media is planting the seed, but also there's many on the conservative side that are running the same headlines. It's fascinating to me when you sit back and watch this stuff from a bird's eye view. And I say it this way. I love Trump. I'm a Trump supporter. He's my number one, but I got to tell you, I'm not mad at DeSantis running at all. I would happily take Ron DeSantis for a president of the United States. Contrary to a lot of conservatives, I think Ron DeSantis is very prepared to be the president of the United States. Yeah, does he need to bulk up on foreign policy? Yes, but I think he would be phenomenal everywhere else, quite frankly. And I think he would get very good very fast when it came to foreign policy, just because of his study habits, because of his focus, because of his discipline. You know, at times, I've wanted Trump for the sake of justice, all right, which I'm going to get into that word in just a sec. But if I'm being fair, if I'm being honest, I am of the belief that DeSantis could accomplish just as much and probably more than Trump could, because he would have, for one, he would have two, likely have, if he were to get the nomination, he would have two terms in order to be able to do that. I think what's headed up right now, I'm looking at how the Senate is taking shape. I wouldn't doubt that even if Trump were to win the presidency, that the establishment in the Senate will come in and kind of curtail Trump. I think that's the goal. And frankly, if we lose the House of Representatives as Republicans, then I think the president, at least for, if it's Trump, he would be a lame duck right away. If it's a DeSantis or if it's someone else, they would struggle in their first term, to say the least. But I'm not of the opinion that Trump would necessarily lose the general election. I just think we got to work hard to make it happen. But I want to get back to why DeSantis is stalling and why all of the narratives. And again, you're not just seeing it from the left, you're seeing it from the right. But Politico has run this kind of playbook. There's a apolitical playbook over the weekend, last weekend, that described DeSantis's campaign as a failure to launch, noting that the polling for DeSantis peaked in January at 40.5%. By the way, this from the Federalist, the title of the column, "DeSantis' Problem Isn't Trump, It's That Dems Rigged the Last Election." And this guy has it right, but I'm adding the word justice. I want to come at it from that angle and break it down here. All right. So you get all these narratives, failure to launch, DeSantis is a failed candidate. And I want you to understand, this isn't a pro DeSantis podcast. This is, I'm telling you what's really happening behind the scenes and in people's hearts and minds podcast when it comes to Ron DeSantis. All right. So again, you even have conservative outlets that I saw praising DeSantis before he announced. All of a sudden, their arrows are or pointed towards him. And you're like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? It's crazy. It's insane. But there's something happening with them, too, where they're emotionally tied to a candidate, which I'll explain. And I think you know the candidate, but I'll explain what's happening there as well. All right, but here's some of the headlines that you might hear, or some of the things that you'll hear about DeSantis's campaign. He's having fundraising struggles. Oh, there's a lack of endorsements, difficulties to distinguish himself from Trump on policy, which I got to tell you, I think that's a silly argument. And it just tells me, frankly, that the conservative movement, we've got a long ways to grow. For me, it isn't just about naming policy. It's making sure that we achieve said policy and legislation, and not via executive order. Because what we saw, even with Trump, is Trump came in and he did some amazing things. One of the best presidents in modern history. But he did a lot of things through executive order. So in day one, when Biden got in, all he did was change all of Trump's policies. Now, what they can't change and what they're squealing over now are his Supreme Court nominations. Praise God. The tax cuts, the tax cuts, those were legislation. So you got to keep more in your pocket. And right now, red states that have adopted more America First policies are the states that are doing well economically, as opposed to blue cities that have not, or states that have not and are not doing as well. With the only exception in a red state being Indiana, that isn't doing as well. It's still not doing horrible, but it's not doing as well as other red states. But you'll hear other things, objectors, even like myself. I look at the polls and I'm like, listen, it's too early. It's too early to say that all is said and done, that this nomination is wrapped up for Trump. But I will say this, it's a snapshot of where we are in history. The polls are right now. And so there's no doubt that Trump is the clear front runner, but it's amongst the base. But that's a good place to be. Now, people are going to start paying attention. Slowly but surely. I think it'll start a little bit tomorrow with Tucker Carlson and the event that he'll be giving at Iowa, hosting the GOP presidential primary forum there. I think that's going to be a big deal. More people are going to start hearing about these guys. That's going to kick off the state campaign, really. And that's what's going to be most important. A lot of these candidates are just hoping they can win a state, especially the initial states. That's certainly the hope that DeSantis has. But right now, at least in current polling, Trump is kicking everybody's butt, Iowa, New Hampshire, so on, etc. So DeSantis is going to have to win. He's going to have to win on one of those. He's got to win Iowa, it seems to me. But he's definitely got to win one of those first three, in my opinion. But getting back to why DeSantis is not as popular in the polls. And it goes back to justice. It goes back to justice, right? You have the corporate media that's out against them. They want to make sure that they push him out of the race. I think just as much as they want to make sure that they push Trump out of the race. There's a lot of people that say, well, Trump can't be bought, but DeSantis can. You might not realize that DeSantis literally took money from Disney for his first election, and guess who he's battling against? You know what I mean? So this is a guy that does have integrity, that does do the right thing, that is willing to take the arrows. The same is true for Trump. But Trump is a known quantity. DeSantis is a quantity that people are learning about. But justice, that's the word that you need to keep in your mind. All right, so let me ask you this question. What if the lack of enthusiasm regarding DeSantis's campaign has nothing to do with DeSantis's campaign or himself? Maybe what we're witnessing, think about this. Maybe what we're witnessing has less to do with the upcoming 2024 election and more to do with the 2020 election. Carl, what do you mean? Goes back to my word, justice. Here's what you have to understand. This is why DeSantis is really struggling in the polls. John Daniel Davidson put it together. I've been talking about this, quite frankly, for some time, but I think he put it together better than I did, more clearly. So I'm trying to refine it by using the word justice and adding my 2 cents to it. But consider what the lefties admitted. They admitted that they undermined the vote in 2020. They admitted that they suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story. We've also found out Americans were censored on social media. The left did unprecedented changes to our voting system under the guise of the pandemic. Those were some of the things that they did. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars into nonpartisan, quote unquote, local election offices through Zuckerbucks, right? Mark Zuckerberg and his connected nonprofits. Consider what John Davidson says. Nothing like that has ever happened in America, and it was all done for the purpose of stopping Trump's second term. That's what it was all about. So what's more is, after we had witnessed the Russia collusion hoax, the Ukraine hoax, the constant bombardment of going after Donald Trump, then you have the election of 2020. And you experience that, and you're like, if you're like me, sitting in the studios with my colleagues and watching the election, and at one point you're like, oh, it's over. Yes, Trump won. And then all of a sudden, hey, what's going on here? Why aren't they wrapping this thing up? I've not seen anything like this. What's going on? Okay, maybe they're just going to call it a little later. They want to be extra, whatever, cautious. And then the election goes on for days and days and days and days, and then months. I mean, it was unbelievable. So maybe you think all of that is nonsense. Maybe you think all of that is, oh, let bygones be bygones. That's in the past. Water under the bridge. Well, I'm sorry. Trump supporters don't feel that way. And this is what DeSantis cannot overcome. Let me give you an example. I want to share some things that DeSantis has already rolled out that barely conservative media outlets are talking about it. I'm telling you right now, and again, this isn't an endorsement, but I'm telling you, I know DeSantis would be an amazing president. I think he would probably get more done than any president in American history for the conservative movement were he elected. But I think he's going to have a hard time getting elected because of justice. Let me give you some examples. DeSantis challenges Biden on another legal front, college accreditation. These college accreditation boards that get to determine what curriculum, is accepted and all that kind of stuff. As far as these, once you get into these college campuses and all this stuff, he files a lawsuit against that. Ron DeSantis says, listen to this. You guys didn't hear about this. The media is barely talking about. Actually, I don't know that anybody talked about this except for the Daily Wire. Ron DeSantis, I will abolish the Department of Education. I will abolish the Department of Energy. I will abolish the Department of Commerce and the IRS. Have you even heard about this? Have you even heard about this? DeSantis and his plan to dismantle the DOJ. DeSantis, his plan to fix the border crisis. DeSantis wants to end Trump's First Step Act, which I'm sorry, that was a disaster. I love Trump, but that was a disaster. You have all these things that DeSantis was planning to do, but the only thing you heard of in the media is DeSantis is copying Trump's border security plan. I just gave you several other things that DeSantis planned to do that even conservative media didn't talk about. So what is the issue? Why is he lagging in the polls? Is it sheer personality? Well, a lot of people wanted to move past Trump and said, listen, we love Trump, we love his policies, but his personality, his tweets, got to go. I'm not as concerned about that stuff. I just want somebody in that will use sheer force to advance the conservative agenda. And I believe Trump will do that. I also believe DeSantis will do that, but I'm not sure that DeSantis will get the chance because of justice. I just laid out all of this stuff that DeSantis has been saying and doing. It is not catching fire with anyone. And I think that Trump and his team have done a good job of framing this narrative, or framing some of these narratives as well as the media, with DeSantis, whether it comes to foreign policy, as he's not ready, not his time. Why is he stealing Trump's ideas? So on, etc. You have to understand that all of this goes back to 2020. It has nothing to do with 2024. What the media is asking you to do, and even DeSantis's campaign, and even Vivek and all these other guys, is move on from 2020 and trust me. Now, DeSantis says that he'll take care of all of the stuff, right? All of the stuff, all of these departments that are trying to ruin our lives, but there's no emotional connection because he wasn't there for 2020. He wasn't the president. The election wasn't rigged against him. It was rigged against Trump, and thereby rigged against all of us who voted for Trump in 2020. And so that's the issue that DeSantis is having getting over. Does this mean that Trump is entitled to the nomination? I'd say no. Even for the sake of justice, only God can determine what justice is. You look in the Bible, you could look at stories of Moses, right? And but not being allowed to go into the promised land, but Joseph is. You look at Saul, King Saul, right? And God initially chooses King Saul as the king, and then David comes up and God uses him for his purposes. But even King David, because of King David's sins, it was his son Solomon that was allowed to build the temple. So God gets to determine what justice is. We don't. All right. But it's amazing. It's amazing to see. And it's fascinating to me that more people aren't talking about this and they haven't figured this out. It isn't about DeSantis. And this is something DeSantis has to realize as well, because I think if he stands any chance of winning even a primary, he's going to have to address this issue. Again, Trump is not entitled to the nomination. To the extent that 2020 was stolen, the columnist writes, it wasn't strictly speaking stolen from Trump, but from the American people. That's basically what I just said. The voters who cast their ballots for Trump in good faith, trusting that our elections were free and fair. But now that we know the 2020 election was not fair and free, Trumpsters aren't just going to are not just going to not just going to line up behind any candidate based on merit, no matter how good they are. And you guys notice this. Notice this. Notice when DeSantis was rising. There was a peak after the 2020 election where DeSantis was just surging. It seemed like he couldn't be stopped. What happened? What happened? The DOJ started going after Trump. And you know what that does to people? It's like, here they go again. Those emotions get riled up. Here they go again. That was a dude that fought for me. They're still going after him. Guess what? I've got his back. That's why Trump is surging in the polls. And see, DeSantis and none of the other candidates can be a part of that because they weren't part of the 2020 election cycle. Only Trump was. So the issue for DeSantis, it isn't his campaign. It isn't DeSantis himself. It's the connection that voters have with Trump because of the injustice that they felt in 2020. The only way that I see DeSantis, and frankly, I want him to be on stage. I would prefer he be closer and neck to Trump. I know some of you don't like that. That's on you. I like it because I believe that iron sharpens iron. And I believe that when you have guys going at it, the best of the best going at it with the best ideas, you know who benefits from that? You do. You do. We, the people, benefit from that. I think we have a right to see Trump on the stage and say, Trump, I love this, but you shut down the economy. Trump, I love what you did with the border wall, but how come you signed so many omnibus bills when Republicans weren't willing, like Paul Ryan, weren't willing to work with you? Trump, why was it that you did the ban on bump stocks? I want to know that stuff because I don't believe whether it's Trump or any president, they should have the authority to mess with the Second Amendment, period. So I want people to ask questions. And you know what that would do? Hey, Trump, like, all right, well, I'm going to do this my next time around, right? And then we get to be the benefactors of that. So iron sharpens iron. Here's the problem, too. GOP voters, they're not convinced that election integrity issues have been fixed. So who would they trust to do that? More so Trump. Now, I am totally convinced that DeSantis would do it because he did it here in Florida. He went against, I heard a conservative say, well, DeSantis really isn't that conservative. The Republican legislature had to kind of push him to, what the hell? What are you talking about? There were times where DeSantis was dragging the Republican legislature, kicking and screaming. He just vetoed a soft on crime bill that the Republican legislature sent to him. And it wasn't soft on crime like these woke DAs, but it was giving criminals just a little more outs, right? And he was like, no, we're not doing that. This is the legislature that we've had in Florida for quite some time. But he drove them to the right. But all of that to say, the only way that DeSantis stands a chance, and this writer makes a great point, to win over GOP primary voters who supported Trump in the past two cycles, the candidates are going to have to speak to the injustice that was done in 2020. DeSantis would have to speak to that specifically. I've seen him do some interviews where he hasn't named Trump. I don't think that's good. I think he needs to flat out say what happened to Donald Trump in 2020 was wrong. We are going to correct that system, and that will never happen again. That will not happen under my watch. If he doesn't do that, he doesn't stand a chance. He's got to gain the if he has any chance. And right now, if you're judging the polls right now, even though I do think they're just a snapshot in time, then it's going to be hard for him to win. They have to admit what happened. The election was rigged. They have to name who did it and affirm that we cannot have a self-governing republic if that's how our elections are going to be. And that's with any other candidates, whether it's Vivek, whether it's Tim Scott, who more and more I'm starting to feel like I love Vivek. He has some great ideas. But I'm starting to wonder if Trump has hired him, frankly, to be a spoiler for that second place spot. I wonder, but he could do it because that guy is amazing. I'm not going to lie, at least in word. Vivek has been pretty amazing. But anyway, that's what that is the real reason DeSantis's campaign is lacking. It has nothing to do with 2024. It has nothing to do with DeSantis's campaign. It doesn't have anything to do with DeSantis himself because people loved him just several months ago. But once the DOJ started going after Trump, it reminded people, oh yeah, we still have some unsettled business that wasn't taken care of in 2020. And there's no connection to Ron DeSantis in 2020. All of the connection is to Trump in 2020. All right, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast. We're on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Also, if you will follow us on social media, I appreciate it. At The Carl Jackson Show, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere that I am on at The Carl Jackson Show. I think we're also True Social and Getter. Until next time, guys, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.